The Civil War between the North and the South was the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history. As is fitting for such a monumental event, it has been surrounded by numerous myths, some of which we will dispel today. How did Abraham Lincoln become the conscience of the American people? When did the Ku Klux Klan emerge? Why did not all Southerners support slavery and not all Northerners oppose it? The main myth about the American Civil War is that all Northerners were against slavery, while all Southerners wanted to maintain and exploit it. In reality, the conflict between the North and the South began with economic and political disagreements. In the early 19th century, two distinct regions developed in the United States. The North became home to factories, mills, and enterprises, while plantation owners settled on the fertile lands of the South. Due to the migration of the workforce to the wealthier North, the South was in desperate need of labor, leading to the mass importation of African slaves. The North and the South coexisted peacefully for a long time, trading goods to their mutual benefit. However, the Northerners began pushing for laws that were advantageous only to them. The North sought to impose high tariffs on their manufactured goods, while the South aimed for free trade with the world. This policy threatened the agrarian South with imminent ruin. The situation worsened after Lincoln's victory in the 1860 election, prompting the Southern states to take urgent action, fearing he would fulfill his promises to abolish slavery. South Carolina was the first to secede from the Union, followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. The conflict rapidly escalated. Abraham Lincoln regarded secession, the withdrawal of states, as rebellion, whereas the South viewed it as a defense of their interests. The U.S. Constitution did not explicitly prohibit or allow secession. On February 4, 1861, 6 states declared the formation of a new nation, the Confederate States of America. Former Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis became the Confederacy's president. Lincoln refused to negotiate with the South, unwilling to recognize the Confederacy's independence. War became inevitable, and hostilities began on April 12, 1861, with the battle for Fort Sumter, the largest seaport in South Carolina. The Confederacy demanded the withdrawal of U.S. troops, but Lincoln refused to surrender the fort. South Carolina then began bombarding the fort, and after 36 hours, it was surrendered. Thus began the Civil War. On April 15th, Lincoln issued a proclamation calling for volunteers. Following this call, the states of Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, which had been wavering, seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy. 4 slave states, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland, remained with the North, underscoring that not all those who fought for the North opposed slavery, nor did all those who fought for the South support it. The most famous general of the Northern Army, Ulysses S. Grant, was a slaveholder and justified his position by saying, "Good help is hard to find these days." Meanwhile, his main opponent, the renowned Southern General Robert E. Lee, was an opponent of slavery. Inspired by their initial victories, the Southerners were determined to continue the fight. They had a well-prepared command structure and still had weapon supplies from the Mexican War. The first major battle occurred at Bull Run on July 21, 1861, where the Northern Army was defeated. Alarmed by the Confederacy's military successes, on July 25th, the U.S. Congress passed the Crittenden-Johnson Resolution, declaring that the war was being fought by the Union to preserve the nation, not to abolish slavery. This formal declaration was necessary to prevent the slave states of Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland from joining the Confederacy. In April 1862, one of the bloodiest battles, the Battle of Shiloh, took place. The Confederate attack was sudden and could have resulted in a complete defeat for the Northern forces, if not for the unexpected arrival of reinforcements. The Southerners were forced to retreat. On April 12, 1862, another famous episode of the Civil War occurred, known as the Great Locomotive Chase. The Union forces, aiming to cut off the enemy supply lines, stole a train from the Confederates. Along the way, they burned bridges, destroyed railroad tracks, and cut telegraph wires. The Confederates made a desperate attempt to catch up with the Union raiders on another train. At the end of the chase, the raiders were captured. We have already mentioned the famous and talented Confederate General Robert E. Lee. His fame as a commander was solidified by the 7 Days Battles, during which the Confederates forced the Union troops to leave the Virginia Peninsula and retreat from Richmond. Lincoln decided to play a new card. On September 22, 1862, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring the freedom of all slaves in any state that had not returned to the Union. With this, Lincoln aimed to end the prolonged war peacefully. In the eyes of the world, the president became a champion of rights and freedoms, an honest man fighting for liberty, effectively killing two birds with one stone. Now Europe was ready to assist the North, while the South lost its sources of arms supply. The second phase of the war began. In July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg took place, becoming a turning point in the conflict between the North and the South. The Union Army withstood the assault of General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and dealt it a critical blow. This defeat finally shattered the Confederates' hope for victory. On July 4, 1863, the Union Army under General Grant captured Vicksburg. This marked the beginning of the final confrontation between Generals Lee and Grant. Grant went on to capture one city after another: Atlanta, Savannah, and Charleston. The Confederates were ready to lay down their arms, but Lincoln sought a complete victory, not a truce. On April 9, 1865, the Battle of Appomattox took place, the last major engagement of the Army of Northern Virginia. Mustering their remaining strength, Lee attempted to attack the Union forces, assuming that only cavalry stood before him. When Lee realized that the cavalry was supported by two infantry corps, he decided to surrender. Thus ended the last major battle in the history of the American Civil War. 5 days after the truce was signed, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater during a play. A Southern sympathizer, actor John Wilkes Booth, entered the presidential box and, seizing the right moment, fatally shot Lincoln. Amid the ensuing chaos, Booth managed to escape, but he was soon caught by the police. His last words were, "Tell my mother that I died for my country." On May 10, 1865, the Confederacy ceased to exist. The surrender of the remaining Confederate Army units continued until June 23, when General Stand Watie surrendered, becoming the last to do so. After the end of the U.S. Civil War, the country once again became a unified state, but it required more than just unity on paper. The period of Reconstruction of the South began. In December, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution came into effect, prohibiting slavery throughout the country. Southerners began to lose money, and urgent transformations were needed. Industrialization began in the southern regions. In response to the actions of the authorities in the South, racist organizations emerged, one of which was the Ku Klux Klan. The Klansmen opposed the abolition of slavery and advocated for white supremacy. In the early stages, they intimidated their political opponents, riding and shouting through the streets of night cities in white sheets. Among African Americans, a belief emerged that they were the ghosts of slain Confederates, and thus, the uniform of the Ku Klux Klan became established, famous white robes with hoods. Over time, their methods of dealing with political opponents and African Americans became increasingly harsh. In 1877, the military's involvement in governing the South was terminated, officially concluding the process of Reconstruction in the South. However, African Americans continued to be regarded as second-class citizens. And that concludes our story. The Civil War of 1861-1865 is considered the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history, claiming over 600,000 lives. However, the political divide between the South and the North continues to this day. Thank you, dear friends, for joining me on this fascinating journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to not miss out on new videos about captivating events and facts from the past. Also, leave your comments under this video. I'm always happy to hear your thoughts, suggestions, and requests for topics for future videos. Until next time on the channel.